different, but the philosophical and often the technical questions are the same. And so it's great to be with a whole bunch of my community, data people. I run a research data service in South Africa. We're based at the University of Cape Town, but we provide a service for any researchers. We're an online service. So my job is to persuade African governments to put their data out there for research reuse. So it's quite a difficult job. And in South Africa, we had a very good Minister of Planning, and he made a decision to put all the data that's collected by government departments out there. So we get a lot of data from government departments, and that's all public access data on our website. So we don't keep data that we can't share. And I was incredibly inspired by Liz at the 2014 World Data Service Conference. It was SciDataCon, and I decided to have a look at some data that I'd been thinking about rescuing and try and raise some funds to do the rescue. And these are the two case studies that I'm going to talk about now. So there's just a definition of at-risk data, data valuable, or fragile or deteriorating, data that's lacking sufficient metadata. In other words, they could be digital, but they still don't have much information about the data. Or data that's not in formats that permit full digital access. So we found out that there were these two collections of survey questionnaires from very famous surveys that happened during the apartheid years. The surveys, they produced a series of scholarly volumes. The records were archived and haven't been used in the decades since then. So we teamed up, some of the records at other universities, we teamed up with those universities to put this data out there, to prepare it and make it available for the research community. So the first case study I'm going to talk about is the Kaiskammerhoek Rural Survey, which looked at, which surveyed villages. There was a project to collect this data, and the betterment scheme I'll give you more details about. It's basically a forced resettlement planning project of the government. And this is a survey from 1940 to 1950. So it's quite an old historical survey. So betterment schemes were designed to, according to the government then, were designed to develop agriculture and to protect the land. So they moved people around in rural villages against their will. And this resulted in a lot of upheaval. And a lot of the formerly self-sufficient rural communities actually became migrant workers after that. And in 1946, a national body, the National Council for Social Research, decided to investigate one of these areas that had been resettled, what was called a native reserve then. And Kaiskammerhoek was selected. That's in the Ciskei. It's a very a poor area of South Africa, a very under-resourced area in the Eastern Cape, and the area that they were looking at had 18,000 inhabitants. And the survey was actually not just one survey, it was a series of surveys. They did a land tenure survey, they collected agricultural data, they did a family budget survey, and they took a lot of migration histories from the village, people in the village, from households in the village. And the data was deposited with the history library at Rhodes University in South Africa. The partner institutions, the Corey Library, that's the history library at Rhodes, and there's an organization called the Institute for Social and Economic Research, which has been doing surveys in the Eastern Cape since the 1940s. And so we've partnered with them to do this work. The risk to the data, well, it's underutilized, limited access, so it's you have to be an academic, accredited academic to have access to the Corey Library. One of the academics had used the data for his thesis, which subsequently was published as a book, and that's the book that you can see there. But otherwise, the records in the library show that the data hasn't been used since then. The questionnaires were completed in pencil, so a lot of them were almost illegible, and they were very faded. So these are some of the findings from the Kaiskammerhoek Rural Survey. Progressive impoverishment, people were moved around, they lost their traditional livelihoods, and this is just one table showing the debt. So they asked the question in the survey, do you have any debt? Does the household have any debt? Who do you owe money to? And from the data, you can see that people were progressively borrowing more and more. So their traditional incomes were not available to them. And what a lot of families did eventually was they sold off their livestock. So you see, when the initial survey is done in 1948, you see quite a few households have 25 cows. Cows was the way that they judged their wealth. And pigs and sheep. And at the end of the survey, in the 1950 family budget survey, you see that a lot of those families have lost their livestock because they've been selling their livestock to pay their debts. They've been borrowing money. That's the one study. The other case study I'm going to talk about was a survey done by the Surplus People Project. That was an NGO that during the 80s decided to investigate the effects of apartheid forced removals on communities in Natal and the Western Cape and in the Free State. And what was interesting about the survey was they asked a lot of quantitative questions, but they also wanted to find out how it had affected family structures and how it had affected people emotionally. So they surveyed 10,000 households in areas affected by the removals. And this is just one quote from, so the question, they actually asked the question, what happened on the day that you were moved? And I think it was expected to be more of, the responses were expected to be more factual, but a lot of people gave the full story, and this is just one extract. A truck stood in front of our house, and the men who had come to remove us entered the house and loaded all our possessions onto the truck. The house was burnt, and we were driven to Izakeni, where we were shown a tent to live in. So there was a lot of media blackout during the forced removals. People didn't report on it. So there's a lot of the data that's in the survey was it was information that wasn't actually readily available at the time. So the partner institutions that we have are the Surplus People Project PRs. They no longer, the Surplus People Project is no longer exists as it was. It's now a rural development NGO. But the former PIs, one of them works for the city council. So I got hold of her when I heard about this data from a researcher at Yale was investigating, and he found out there were all these questionnaires in Natal Library and in UCT Library, and asked if we could have a look at digitizing the data. And I got hold of the PIs. Fortunately, they were still in the same town, and they gave up their permission to actually digitize the data and put it out there as a public access data set. We traced the questionnaires to the special collections sections of the UK, ZN, and UCT libraries, and we negotiated with the librarians to have access. The risk for that, again, it was underutilization. It's difficult to find the data set, so most people don't know that those questionnaires are available in the special collections in the library. You also have to be an accredited researcher to get access. Access is limited. The libraries only open a certain number of hours. Photocopying facilities are difficult. And these were also paper questionnaires. And then you can see one of the questionnaires there. That's actually, there's almost no content there. We had to enlarge quite a few of the questionnaires to see the content. But as you can see, this is the UKZN library had a very nice accession number that we used as the household number in the end. The UCT records weren't as well organized. And here's some findings from the project. Interestingly, a lot of the families that were removed had owned their land, and some of them had lived in the same household for 100 years. So that the average, more than half had lived in that area, the place from which they were removed, for more than 10 years. And some people just answered, we were born here. So those we put under 51 plus. And another question that was asked in the questionnaire was, did you have to sell your stock because you were removed? And a number of the very established households had stock and which they had to sell. In fact, legally you weren't allowed to take your stock with you when you were removed. Most families sold their stock to the local policeman because they had to get rid of their stock quickly, and the policemen were only too happy to take their livestock. So this is what we do. This is I've modeled our research data service based on its a standard model. And you can see up here is what the data rescue project, where the data rescue project's for. So this is what we do. We get data, we get data deposited with us, we assure the data, we create metadata, and this is the preservation copy that we have. We have different ways of sharing the data. You can do online analysis with our software. You can download the raw data, because all the data that we share is raw data, individual records, unit record data. And then I also run a secure data service with potentially confidential data, household GPS coordinates, family details, student records. Our university gave us the student records to put in there. And this is actually a physical space that researchers need to visit to work with the data. And then this is all the curation we do, but we also have other services, like we help researchers with their research data management, we help them with citing the data, we keep a track of data usage. If I have time, I'll show you what our website looks like. And this is a lot of researchers here, data-intensive research, finding the data, using the data, and then researchers, of course, create their own data. And I like to mention what I call the virtuous cycle of reuse. So we get the data, we prepare it, we share it, researchers use it, they feed back to the data quality, and then we feed back the data quality issues to the data producer, and we also help the data producer to create perhaps a new improved version of the data, or if we can't actually improve the data, or we just provide data quality notes on our website with the metadata so that researchers know what to look out for in a particular data set. So we've done that with the 2 data sets that we've created from the data we rescued. So these are the stages that we went through. Finding the data. As I said, the researcher approached us to tell us about this data set, and then we worked with the librarians to find where the data was stored, the records were stored. Then this is time consuming, but this is the difficult part generally, is to get permissions. In this case, it was actually really nice. The PRs were very keen for the data to be put out there. They published a very famous book based on their research, but they were happy for other researchers to do work on it. The audit is extremely time consuming, but actually quite fun. So we visited the universities initially to work with the librarians and produce this data audit. And then we went back to the universities. I went back with my data capture team. We designed software to capture the data. And that was the most time-consuming part, because we actually had to go to, and the most costly, because we had to visit the libraries and actually stay in the towns to get the work done. And then now we're at the stage where we're cleaning the data. We're anonymizing the data, because family names are in both data sets. So we've removed the family names, and that's the sort of basic anonymization that we've done. We're obviously checking the data against the original sources. Data conversion, we usually put our data sets up in a statistical analysis program. We use R because R is free and it's open source, but we also provide the data in other formats, like SAS, SPS, Stata. I've done a lot of documenting already. What I did was there were 4 reports that were produced from the Surplus People project, and 4 hardbound volumes that were produced from the Kaiskamahoek Rural Survey, and that I've digitized using our funders' resources. And I've also mostly created metadata, but we'll create a final version of the metadata when we put the data up. So this we haven't done yet. The Surplus People project data set will be up by October, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll have both data sets up, and they'll be available as public use files on our website. I also want to write an account of this for Dari. I'm not sure where the inventory is at this stage, because I know they're still working on it's still a prototype, but I think that'll be a really nice place to put this type of project report and lessons learned from our data rescue project. Well, that's just my university on the hill. I'm going to show you what it's going to look like. So let me just see if this is going to work. There we go. Okay, so this is our website. So here's our data portal. So researchers just need to register once on the site, and then they can download the data. So I'm just going to log in so you can see what it looks like. So both data sets are going to be up on this site as public data sets. We also, because we've partnered with some of the universities, we provide sort of a dedicated space, collection space. So you can see this is the School of Development Studies at UKZN. They ran a panel study for many years, and then the university restructured, and they lost their website, so they had no way to share their data. So this is a form of data at risk. And we already shared the metadata on our site, and we linked to their site for the data. So they asked if we could share their data as well. So we've sort of customized the page. That's just these are all the data sets that we share in our secure space. So if you're a researcher and you wanted access to the data, you should just be able to select what data. This is the metadata that we have. It's a standard, so the social science data services have a standard metadata tool called the Nestor Publisher. We all describe our data in the same format. So it's machine readable, and you can do a lot of data comparisons just by looking at the metadata. This is actually a data set on mobile phone companies and their pricing and their products. And it's used quite extensively because it's something that researchers are very interested in. You can tell from the metadata what the downloads are. This one's just been put up. You can also get a description of how the data was collected. And this is quite a lot of detail because they had set ways of putting the data together. Data access. So this is a licensed data set, which means you apply for it and I have to click a button and then you download it because it's for research use only, but it's all still online. You can also have a look at the data files, and you'll be able to do this for both data sets that we've rescued. So you can actually look at each variable in the data set. And what's nice about that is you can, in fact, search at variable level for data on the site. So for instance, if you wanted to know what data sets we have on income, and you search at variable level, it'll actually give you a list of the data sets that have a variable related to income. And then you can click on the little blue arrow and you can see what the variables are. And you can also compare the variables with variables from other data sets. So people should be able to find the data. So this is the idea here is that at the moment, nobody even knows that that data exists. You should be able to use our metadata to discover the data and then download it quite easily. So we're hoping there'll be a lot of interesting research done. There are, in fact, 2 Harvard academics waiting for this data to be up, the Surplus People Project data. One of them was the person who notified us about the data. And so that's going to be really interesting to see what people have done with it, what we'll do with it. So once you've found the data and you decide from looking at the metadata that you actually want this data, and you can download the questionnaires, any technical documents. So I've actually digitized the four volumes that came out of both these surveys, because they're actually out of print now. And I got permission from the PIs to do that. And those will be up as documents as well. So I'm going to use a public access data set for this. So you can see we share at different levels. Mostly our data sets are public access. If we get a deposit that's, the depositor requires us to share it only for research purposes, we use that. Still online, but I have to see what you're going to do with it first. And then this is for sharing in our secure data service. So if you were wanting to download the data from the public access data set, you could just click, once you're registered, you just click Get Microdata, and there it is. So this is the raw data from that survey. And you can download it in SAS, SPSS data, or CSV files. So hopefully that's how the Surface People Project and Kaskamahuk Rural Survey data sets will look by the end of the year. You'll be able to download them from our site. Okay, any questions? We're gonna. Oh, I can see. Yeah, sure.
I thought that was a really good presentation, and I always enjoy hearing about records management, especially with related to social justice issues. And this presentation, the project, sounds like it involves a lot of researchers around the world, but I was curious about the population themselves who were displaced and removed, if there was any outreach to them throughout this project, or if they've expressed interest in using these records, and how this public release of data has affected the relations between that community and with the government, if it's helped any kind of healing processes, and just, a lot of that is very traumatic for people, and so how releasing this data might have affected that.
That's a very interesting question. Okay, so the Kaskamahuk Rural Survey was done in 1948. So yes, so we wouldn't reach out to the descendant, but an interesting thing is the person who set up data first, Professor Francis Wilson, who's a bit of a guru, his mother ran the Kaskamahuk Rural Survey. So, and for about 10 years he's been talking about how wonderful it will be to have that data out there. So I think the academic community will benefit, but for the Surface People Project, we're going to have outreach with what's now the sort of subcomponent of the Surface People Project. They only work in rural areas, but we're inviting them to our launch, and that's actually, it'll be very interesting to work with them. It's difficult to pinpoint the community. I mean, some people who were removed, they're academics at UCT. So, but that's actually a very good point. I mean, I haven't thought about it much, because I've just been focused on doing that. I mean, the data's not out yet. But what I have done is there's an organization called South African History Online, and they have fabulous materials which they just make available free. But they rely a lot on research projects like ours to provide them with documents to put on their site. And weirdly enough, they contacted the PI of the project, not related to the project we were working on at all, and asked the PI of the Surface People Project, asked her if they could digitize her book and put it up online, and she referred them to me. And so what I've been able to do is I've paid for all the documents to be digitized, not just the book, but all the reports, and I've said they can put them up because we've got permission. So that will be on South African History Online, and I think that will have repercussions as well, because people will see the documents and be referred back to us for the data. But that's actually, you've given me lots of ideas now.
So I had a question about sort of selection of this case, or these two particular survey cases. And we heard from the earlier talks this morning about needing to sort of triage between multiple possible data rescue projects. And I was curious in your case if you had a similar situation where you had multiple projects and you're sort of prioritizing these ones, and if so, if there was any sort of criteria by which you prioritize these.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we just have too much work. We'll never do all the things that we need to do. But, I mean, we like our job. So I like being useful. So what the impetus was actually the data rescue session that we had at SciDataCon, where Elizabeth inspired me. And I'd been thinking about the Kaiskamma project because people had asked us for the data. And because I knew that Professor Wilson was, well, I mean, he just loved that. And the academics that work at the ISER, that research unit that we work with at Rhodes, one of the researchers said to me, now I'll at least be able to look Professor Wilson in the face now, because they were trusted with the data. They had part curatorship of the data, and they'd never done anything with it. So the impetus was, we were approached by two academics. The one academic's waiting for the data now for the Surface People Project data. And so once I started looking at that, I got hold of the people at Rhodes and said, okay, we're going to do this project together, because we approached our funders, the Mellon Foundation, and we asked for a no-cost extension of money that they'd already given us for another project, but we did the project with less money. We must be the only people in the world who did that. But and they were only too happy. So they were very good projects, both of them, and it actually didn't cost the Mellon Foundation any more money, although the next one will, because now that we've done it, we've sort of been inspired to do something like that. And we've acquired a wealth of skills and information. I mean, when I started, I didn't know anything. I know a lot about data because I've been a data curator for 20 years, but we'd never done a project like this. And now I have one of my researchers, one of my data analysts, they are technical people that work in the unit, and they usually clean the data and check the data when it comes in. And now he's acquired skills in converting this type of data set. It's been very useful. One of my other staff members, he took the genealogies from the Kaiskamma Rural Survey, and he used R, and he made these amazing family trees, which I didn't know you could do in R. So that we're going to put up as well, which is going to be really beautiful. The first researcher to work with that hand drew all the family trees, which is pretty amazing, in the 80s. So it was sort of a push more than anything else.
So in the data rescue schematic that you showed, there was a place where you discussed about use of software algorithms for transforming digital, pre-digital records to digital. So my question is, are the software algorithms that you have for rescuing wide variety of data sets, they can be reused, or you have to constantly have different versions of software algorithms developed for it?
So what we did was we created what's basically an access database with fields for each survey, so that we can adapt for any surveys we do now. So we did it first for Kaiskamma, and then we adapted it for the Surface People Project, and it creates. So the output is an Excel spreadsheet, but also a data file. And a log file of any problems, and it's got built-in checks and skip patterns. And then we've also created some fuzzy logic programs to convert names, because one of the things I didn't take into account, and people can learn from this, is most of my data capturers weren't South African, and so they didn't know about South African place names. And when I was working with them in KwaZulu-Natal, I was able to, assist with that. But the UCT records, I've never seen so many variations in spelling in my whole life. And so we've created a fuzzy logic program to actually do that. So we don't have to do that manually, and that we'll make available definitely. Any of the resources we use we'll make available. Even one of my data capturers. The first time we went to capture some data, we had to bug the librarians to make photocopies of the questionnaires. And then we thought, why are we doing this? We have cell phones. So then we used SnapScan, which is a truly lovely little app because it actually straightens the questionnaire, and it actually makes the end product is much clearer than the original, which is really, really nice. So we just snap scanned all the questionnaires in the end, and it was actually much quicker.
Quickly.
Just a very quick comment to follow up on Tara's earlier question. I don't think it's necessarily up to you to do the add-on research and to contact the people to look for other ways in which the data can be used, because your task is as a project facilitator, and it is the whole strength of getting these data, old data, into the public domain that then brings on the transdisciplinary use of those data in ways which we, the originators of the recovered data, never imagined. So if you get your sort of data tied in with demographic data, tied in with medical data, then you get the epidemiologists coming on board and can tell you how disease spreads, which is not certainly the sort of thing that you started out to find, but they will find it for you once you get all these data there for them.
Yes, that's actually true. Well, we don't suggest projects. I mean, we just put the data out there. But what we've noticed is that a lot of our academics are arriving wanting to link files, especially the researchers who are using our secure data service, because we have household level data. So you know where the houses are. And we have one researcher from Michigan she got the clinic data from government, the GPS coordinates of the clinics. And she's linking it with the panel data, which is also GPS has the coordinates, and she's looking at access to clinics, the correlation between access to clinics and birth intervals in families. But she can only do that because she's got this very, very low level data, and she's linking it. And people are starting to link census data with the panel data, and I can see that. So we have a data set that we've created that has it has labor force data in it, but it's actually made up of a whole series of data sets from government. And we've taken out the labor market data and we've harmonized. It's a stacked data set which has the variables harmonized across years. And we started from 94, but now we keep getting older data sets that we're adding to it. And we recently got contacted by an American researcher, and I can't remember what university he was at, who did a survey in 91, and he gave us his income data to add to this growing data set. So that's a very interesting product, and we're getting to the point where we're hitting big in social science data terms, because of the linkages that people are doing.